I never expected a single lottery ticket to change everything. At 72, Dorothy Benson, a retired librarian from rural Maine, thought her days of excitement were long behind her. But when I scratched that ticket and discovered I had won $1.5 million, the quiet rhythm of my life exploded into chaos, opportunity, and unexpected alliances. For years, I'd managed a modest retirement, carefully saving each paycheck, volunteering at the library, and baking pies for neighbors. Money had never been my driving force. Stability, routine, and my granddaughter Lily were my treasures. But suddenly, millions of dollars appeared in my bank account, shifting the way everyone saw me overnight. Friends began asking for loans with sudden urgency. Old acquaintances resurfaced with suspicious timing, and even family members seemed to measure me with new eyes. And through it all, Lily, wise beyond her 17 years, noticed the subtle shifts before I did. She whispered over breakfast one morning, "Grandma, they don't want you, they want your money." And she was right. I realized that wealth wasn't just numbers. It was influence, perception, and hidden intentions. It came with both opportunities and hidden risks that could unravel trust faster than the library's old paperbacks could fall off the shelves. As I looked at Lily's determined face, I understood that this windfall wasn't just about luxury. It was a lesson, a challenge, and if handled wisely, a chance to right some wrongs and even teach a little poetic justice. If you're watching this, subscribe and comment where you're from. Let me take you back to how a retired librarian and her clever granddaughter navigated sudden fortune, family tension, and a plan that nobody saw coming. Before the lottery, my life was steady but unremarkable. I'm Gloria Simmons, 62, a retired librarian living in a quiet neighborhood in Boston. My days were filled with organizing book clubs, tending to my rose garden, and spoiling my granddaughter Lily. Money had never been a driving force for me. I managed my modest savings carefully, never dreaming of extravagance. Lily, my 16-year-old granddaughter, had always been my shadow, curious, sharp, and always asking questions about life, money, and fairness. She admired how I lived simply, but even she couldn't imagine the whirlwind that was about to hit our lives. It was an ordinary Tuesday when everything changed. I bought a single lottery ticket on a whim, mostly for the thrill. I never imagined it would transform me from a quiet retiree into a multimillionaire overnight. When the numbers were drawn, my heart stopped. $1.5 million. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor, shaking, while Lily jumped around screaming with joy. That night, our lives shifted in ways neither of us could predict. Winning the lottery wasn't just about money, it was about attention. Friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives suddenly became curious, overly kind, or strangely demanding. Offers to help or invest began pouring in. Letters, phone calls, and surprise visits became a daily routine. What was once a peaceful home had turned into a stage where people tested loyalties, gauged intentions, and weighed their chances of gaining from my newfound fortune. Even within my family, the dynamics changed. My son Mark and daughter-in-law Sarah began acting differently, subtle at first, then more overt. Requests that once seemed normal suddenly carried undertones of expectation. They didn't see me as the grandmother who baked cookies and listened to Lily's homework frustrations. They saw the $1.5 million jackpot. Through it all, Lily remained constant. She noticed things I didn't, asked the right questions, and reminded me to protect not just the money, but our family's trust and values. Together, we began to navigate this new reality, learning lessons about caution, strategy, and the sometimes surprising nature of human behavior when money is involved. This backstory sets the stage for the conflict, showing the sudden shift from a quiet, ordinary life to one filled with scrutiny, expectations, and moral decisions. Lily's presence will prove essential, not just as a helper, but as the moral compass and strategic partner in the unfolding story of wealth, deception, and revenge. The day I won the $1.5 million lottery was surreal. I, Gloria Simmons, had spent decades living a quiet, modest life. My home was filled with the warmth of books, the scent of roses, and the laughter of my granddaughter Lily. But that ordinary Tuesday morning changed everything. I scratched the numbers off the ticket and froze. $1.5 million. My heart raced. I looked at Lily, who was leaning over my shoulder, and we both screamed in disbelief. Tears, laughter, and shock all collided at once. In that moment, I realized my life would never be the same. Suddenly, the world around me shifted. Neighbors who barely knew me began offering friendly advice about investments. Distant relatives called, some with genuine congratulations, others with subtle hints about sharing my winnings. Even friends treated me differently, their smiles a little too wide, their questions a little too probing. Within my own family, the shift was even more palpable. My son Mark and daughter-in-law Sarah began acting strangely, small changes at first, lingering comments about expenses, casual questions about my plans for the money. Then, the undertones became harder to ignore. It was clear they were calculating, assessing what they could gain. But amid the swirl of attention, one presence remained constant: Lily. My granddaughter saw things I couldn't, noticed the subtle manipulations, and reminded me to keep my wits about me. Together, we began to strategize, not just how to enjoy the winnings, but how to protect it from those who might try to take advantage. That lottery ticket didn't just bring wealth, it brought clarity. It revealed who could be trusted, who had hidden agendas, and who truly cared about me, not just the money. It was the beginning of a journey that would test my patience, intelligence, and loyalty, forcing me to navigate the unexpected complexities of sudden fortune. Little did anyone know, especially Mark and Sarah, that Lily and I were already thinking several steps ahead. The $1.5 million wasn't just a windfall, it was the opening move in a game that none of them saw coming. Almost immediately after the lottery win, the tension in my household became palpable. I, Gloria Simmons, could feel the subtle shifts in Mark and Sarah's behavior, once warm and familiar, now edged with expectation and quiet calculation. Every casual comment about groceries or bills seemed loaded with an underlying question. What else could I get my hands on? It started small. Mark, jokingly, suggested that I consider investing in a family business. Sarah casually dropped hints about expenses I could cover. At first, I brushed it off as harmless chatter, but Lily, the ever-observant granddaughter, noticed the patterns instantly. She whispered, "Grandma, they're testing you. They want to see how much they can push." As days passed, the stakes grew. Invitations to family dinners were no longer about connection. They were inspections, evaluations of how I would respond to subtle manipulations. The house felt like a chessboard, each move calculated by those closest to me. I began second-guessing every word, every gesture, unsure who was genuine and who was scheming. Then came the ultimatum. Mark suggested I put the money into a safe joint account, one where he would have equal access. Sarah nodded vigorously, trying to appear supportive. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about family security, it was about control. They weren't asking, they were assuming. I realized that this wasn't just about the money, it was about respect, autonomy, and trust. My life savings, amplified by the lottery, had made me a target. Every smile, every compliment, even casual conversations were laced with ulterior motives. It was exhausting, infuriating, and heartbreaking all at once. Through it all, Lily remained my anchor. She reminded me that I didn't have to play by anyone else's rules, that wealth could be a shield if wielded wisely. Together, we started planning, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. We needed to protect our future while teaching Mark and Sarah a subtle, unspoken lesson about boundaries, integrity, and respect. The tension reached a peak when they assumed they could access my lottery funds without consultation. That's when I realized this was more than a family dispute. It was a test of strategy, patience, and foresight. Every decision from that moment on had to be deliberate, calculated, and above all, discreet. The stage was set, the players were in place, and Lily and I were ready to outsmart them before their schemes could take root. Lily and I spent hours dissecting every interaction, every subtle push from Mark and Sarah. At 67, I had lived through enough schemes, sly remarks, and manipulations to recognize patterns instantly. But with Lily's sharp eye and tech-savvy instincts, we saw things I might have missed alone. She became my partner in strategy, a co-conspirator in protecting what was rightfully mine. The first step was establishing boundaries. I made it clear, politely but firmly, that my lottery winnings were off limits. Casual comments or passive-aggressive suggestions were met with measured responses, letting Mark and Sarah realize that I was no longer the passive target they assumed. I learned to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming control over my life and my finances. Next, we implemented discreet tracking. Every suggestion they made about money, every attempt to influence decisions was carefully noted. Lily suggested creating a financial map, a detailed outline of accounts, assets, and legal protections. With every entry, I felt more secure, more confident that no one could manipulate me without consequences. Then came the subtle counter-strategy. Instead of confrontation, we used distraction and redirection. When Mark suggested investments that would give him access, I pretended interest while steering the conversation elsewhere. I allowed them to feel included and valued, while the real control remained firmly in my hands. Lily helped me craft narratives that made my compliance seem like collaboration. But in reality, every move was calculated to safeguard the funds and test their intentions. Along the way, I discovered a new sense of empowerment. Money, I realized, wasn't just about comfort, it was a tool for independence. I had spent decades giving, sacrificing, and accommodating. Now, I had the freedom to define the rules. With Lily by my side, I navigated the treacherous waters of familial greed with confidence, patience, and precision. By the end of the first month, it was clear Mark and Sarah had underestimated me. Every attempt to access the funds was either subtly deflected or carefully guided to a dead end. I wasn't just protecting money. I was teaching a lesson about respect, foresight, and the consequences of underestimating someone who refuses to be controlled. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. It was strategy, discipline, and empowerment. And with Lily's help, I was finally playing the game on my own terms. The weeks following our strategic maneuvers brought more than just financial security. They sparked a transformation I hadn't expected. At 67, I had lived through loss, betrayal, and disappointment, but I realized that true power wasn't just in protecting my wealth. It was in reclaiming my confidence, my voice, and my autonomy. I started noticing subtle shifts in myself. Conversations that once left me anxious now felt like opportunities to assert control calmly and gracefully. I no longer feared judgment from Mark, Sarah, or anyone else. Their opinions had lost their power over me. Every time I navigated a delicate situation successfully, I felt a quiet pride swelling inside me. I was no longer just a grandmother who had won the lottery. I was a woman who had learned to navigate complex family dynamics with skill and poise. Spending time with Lily added another layer to my growth. Her perspective reminded me that empowerment could be both practical and creative. Together, we brainstormed ways to enjoy the money responsibly, investing in causes that mattered to me, supporting local businesses, and even planning small adventures I had always postponed. Money became not a source of tension, but a tool for fulfillment. I also reflected on my relationships. Some, like my closest friends and certain family members, deepened as they saw me take charge of my life. Others, particularly those who had tested boundaries, naturally drifted away. And that was okay. I had learned a crucial lesson. Not every relationship deserves preservation, especially when respect is absent. By this stage, I understood the real reward wasn't just outsmarting my daughter-in-law or preserving my winnings. It was the renewed sense of agency, the reclaiming of dignity that came from standing firm and taking ownership of my choices. I was no longer living in fear of exploitation or manipulation. I was living intentionally on my own terms, and that realization was liberating. Looking in the mirror one morning, I saw a woman who had been underestimated her entire life, yet had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. My granddaughter's support had not only protected my fortune, it had helped me rediscover myself. The $1.5 million had been the spark, but the real transformation was the reclaiming of my own power. From that point forward, life felt different. Every decision, every interaction, every smile carried subtle but undeniable confidence. I was in control, and nothing could take that away from me. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. My daughter-in-law, Rebecca, had been quietly testing boundaries, sending subtle requests, and planting doubts in my son Mark's mind. But Lily and I had anticipated her moves, and now it was time to assert control decisively. It happened during a family gathering, a so-called casual brunch that Rebecca had orchestrated to pressure me into giving her access to the $1.5 million. She arrived with her usual confident smile, a stack of documents, and an attitude that suggested she already believed victory was hers. She spoke first, presenting her claims, emphasizing debts she'd allegedly incurred, and insinuating that I owed her support. I listened calmly, letting her words hang in the air while I assessed the room. Every glance, every half-smile from Mark, every sideways glance from distant relatives was being quietly noted. Lily, seated beside me, offered a small, reassuring nod. It was our signal. Now, I addressed Rebecca directly, my voice steady, measured, and unyielding. I reminded her of the legality of the lottery winnings, the clear separation of assets, and the careful planning I had undertaken to protect both myself and Mark. I cited financial documents, legal precedents, and the advice we had obtained from trusted professionals. Every word carried weight because it was rooted in preparation, foresight, and truth. Rebecca's confident facade faltered almost immediately. Her attempts to manipulate the conversation with guilt and subtle intimidation fell flat. Each of my responses, backed by evidence and calm authority, dismantled her arguments piece by piece. I could see her growing frustration, the subtle panic rising as she realized that her strategy had been entirely anticipated. Then came the final blow. I revealed the steps Lily and I had already implemented, the accounts that had been legally separated, the investments that were inaccessible to anyone without my explicit authorization, and the careful distribution of gifts and donations that demonstrated transparency. At that moment, the room fell silent. Rebecca had no rebuttal. Her attempts to challenge me legally or emotionally had been preempted with precision. Mark, finally seeing the full scope of my planning and the wisdom behind it, expressed quiet admiration. He realized that my actions weren't about control. They were about protection, fairness, and foresight. Rebecca's defeat was not humiliating. It was a clear boundary-setting moment, an assertion that my autonomy and assets could not be undermined. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of closure. The tension that had built for months dissolved. I had protected my fortune, my dignity, and the harmony of my family while teaching lessons in respect and foresight. The $1.5 million was safe, but more importantly, my authority and confidence were unquestioned. It was a decisive victory, one that reaffirmed the lessons I had learned. Preparation, strategic thinking, and steadfast courage always win over manipulation and entitlement. The days after the confrontation felt surreal. The tension that had loomed over our household for weeks began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of relief and quiet empowerment. Rebecca retreated, her presence no longer looming over every decision, every conversation, and every family gathering. Mark, now fully aware of the depth of my planning and foresight, treated both Lily and me with newfound respect, and our family rhythm began to restore itself. With the $1.5 million lottery winnings securely protected, I shifted focus to what mattered most, ensuring that my wealth became a tool for positive influence rather than a source of conflict. Lily and I worked together to develop a structured plan for charitable donations, small investments, and family gifts that reflected our values. Every dollar had a purpose, every decision carefully considered to strengthen trust rather than create dependency or resentment. It wasn't just about the money, it was about relationships. I realized that wealth, when wielded thoughtfully, could inspire growth and connection rather than envy or exploitation. I spent more time mentoring Lily, teaching her not only financial literacy, but also the importance of foresight, prudence, and courage in the face of challenges. Her guidance during the conflict had been invaluable, and our bond grew stronger as a result. Over the following months, our home transformed from a space of quiet apprehension to a place of openness and shared responsibility. Family gatherings were no longer marred by hidden agendas or quiet tension. Conversations flowed freely, marked by laughter, understanding, and mutual respect. Mark, inspired by the lessons he had learned firsthand, began making independent, thoughtful decisions, no longer swayed by manipulative influences. I also reflected on the personal growth I had achieved. The experience had tested my patience, strategy, and emotional intelligence. It reinforced a vital lesson. The greatest victories are often achieved not through confrontation alone, but through preparation, foresight, and unwavering resolve. I had not only defended my assets, I had fortified my confidence, sharpened my instincts, and cultivated a deeper sense of purpose. In the end, the $1.5 million remained secure, but its true value lay in the lessons it had brought. The family had been tested, loyalties clarified, and relationships strengthened. What began as a potential crisis became an opportunity for empowerment, wisdom, and unity. Sometimes, wealth can reveal the cracks in relationships, but it can also illuminate strength, resilience, and trust. I emerged not only richer in finances, but in wisdom, family bonds, and life experience. The story wasn't just about protecting money. It was about safeguarding dignity, cultivating foresight, and ensuring that triumph comes not only in wealth, but in character and heart.